Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. The proposals do not improve the possibility of achieving long-term peace, said Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov, highlighting Moscow's skepticism toward ongoing U.S.-led negotiations. As talks in Florida wrapped up without any breakthrough after 3 days, Ukraine faces simultaneous military pressure and the looming threat of further territorial loss. Now, to speak about the latest, we are joined by Iryna Krasnoshtan, Program Director at International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Thanks so much for joining us here on TVP World. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Iryna, let's begin with the latest information. I mean, these talks over 3 days in Florida with the Americans, Witkoff meeting the Russians separately, then meeting the Ukrainians and the Europeans, constructive and productive, that's what they're calling it. What do you think the takeaway is? Where are we going next after these days of negotiations?
Well, yes, some parties are describing them as constructive and productive, but I think they have been describing them as such for quite some time. So we are heading probably in the next round of negotiations. And, we basically go slightly in circles with the negotiations, because we can see that the sides, have not reaching compromises on the most essential things. And I would say that, when we go in more details, when we see that, for example, State Secretary from the U.S., Marco Rubio, says that 90% of issues are agreed, but only 10% remain. But, if you look at these issues, the 10% is the essential issues, because they concern the territories, they concern the issues about Ukraine's sovereignty, security guarantees, and so on. So these are the essential topics. So I think that we are just going to the next rounds of the negotiation. The positive moment is probably that finally the Europeans are also joining the talks. They are finally at the table. It's not only the Americans and Russians who are imposing things on Ukraine. Ukraine has now someone on their side as well to support some of the issues on our side. Yes, but the negotiations do not go in the vacuum. So as you mentioned, there are things going on the ground. And first of all, on one hand, there is Russia, who continues to attack the civilian and energy infrastructure, and we know there are power outages and so on. There were heavy attacks on Odessa recently and Odessa region. And just over this weekend, there was a deadly attack on Odessa region. But on the other hand, there are also, from Ukrainian side, an attempt to also influence situation on the ground, because there were several successful military operations from Ukrainian side. We have seen, for example, President Zelensky making, a video address from Kupiansk that Russia claimed to have taken. So there are some counteroffensive going there. Then we have seen several special operations against, Russian submarine in Novorossiysk, or, Ukrainian long-range drones hitting the oil platforms in the Caspian Sea. So we can see that Ukrainian side is also trying very hard to change the situation on the battlefield, or at least to show that Russia has vulnerabilities, unlike they claim it. And one important element to add to that is also the decision made in Brussels recently, this Friday, the decision to provide the long-term financial support to Ukraine, 90 billion of euros for 2 years. I think it's also important. Of course, it's not in the scale and through the methods that we hoped, because we hope that the loan, there would be the reparation loan against the Russian frozen assets, but it's a long-term commitment that Europe has provided for Ukraine. And I think it's also important in these negotiations, because, the Americans believe that they can, just talk to Russians, and Russians will accept some compromises out of goodwill. But I think, it's not possible. Russia just needs to be forced into something, and there should be more pressure. And right now, Ukraine is trying to make some military operations on the ground that would show Russian vulnerabilities, and there is this long-term commitment. So there are the attempts to change a little bit the balance in which maybe Russia will change the calculus.
All right. Many things there, as you said, from the battlefield to financial support. But one thing, I want to get back to the weekend talks that wrapped up. I mean, as you said, they're kind of going in circles, addressing things that are really essential. But one thing I want to just ask you, because we have a post from Mr. Umerov from the Ukrainian delegation, quite high up there. And there's some interesting things he's posted online. I'm just wondering what you make of it, saying very much here, I'm quoting, that there was a lot of focus on 4 key documents. One was about the 20-point plan, aligning positions, multilateral security guarantees, economic prosperity plan, security guarantee framework for Ukraine, and interesting here, I'm quoting here, discussing timelines and the sequencing of the next steps. So if we can maybe analyze that a little bit, when you hear something like that, is there a silver lining here? Or when you hear that, when you read that, is there some kind of, let's say, hope for something tangible and viable to come through after all? I mean, rather than just dismissing it and going through the motions?
Well, I don't know exactly what Mr. Umerov means in this. There could be a few things. First of all, it could be the timings related to the ceasefire agreement or to the potential peace plan agreement. But we have heard that from the American side, there were several attempts to impose some deadlines, but I think they're counterproductive in this particular case because, I mean, if you just impose deadlines and push through in a rushed way, I'm not sure it's producing the results you want, and especially, as I mentioned, when there is a key element of the pressure on Russia that is missing from the point. So basically, if you pressure only Ukraine into this deal, and do not pressure the Russian side and rush through the deadlines, I am not sure this is producing the results that you wanted for the sustainable peace. The second aspect that could be potentially kind of covered in there is that the sequencing, because there are some concerns regarding which agreement you sign first, because for Ukrainian side it is very important to understand the security guarantees element. And also, if you look, for example, on the recent polls from the Ukrainian population, more than 80% of Ukrainians want to see actually this security guarantees component, and they do not want Ukraine to proceed with to accept the peace deal that will not involve this component of security guarantees. So the question could be about the sequence, because if you accept the general framework first and you do not accept the consequent documents that are outlining the actual security guarantees for Ukraine, and I would like to underline that Ukrainian side really wants this to be also passed through American Congress to give more legitimacy to the security guarantees from the American side. And we do not yet know if that's the way how the Americans are, willing to do that. So there are these few elements in the line, and that's why I don't feel that at this point of time the progress could be made in a very short term. So I don't see in the very near term the successful completion of that for several reasons that are outlined already. And the biggest of them is the Russian strategic calculus, that there is a need to change it, because without it we will continue to go in circles.
Right, I mean, going in circles, but I want to ask you also, when we hear, let's say, Steve Witkoff or the Americans saying there's been productive sessions, we're making constructive progress, but then at the same time, this line just from the Kremlin, Yuri Ushakov was saying that the proposals do not improve the possibility of achieving long-term peace, meaning that the proposals by the Europeans don't achieve any long-term peace. So when we have something like that, and we hear that there is constructive progress, we still see on the battlefield both sides fighting. Where are we with all this?
Yes, first, for the constructive progress, I mean, all the parties, they are trying to not undermine the American leadership. And I mean, of course, the American themselves as the host, they want to present the talks as productive. And the fact that they are having them is already the first kind of point. And I understand that, you know, different sides, they also don't want to undermine, and they don't want to discourage Americans to get out of this process, because at least the Americans seems to be the one who can bring people together and who can, you know, be leading this discussion. So I understand why the diplomats are calling these talks constructive and productive, to show that there is some progress and to keep the American leadership in. As to the European proposals and the Russian comments, so basically, as I mentioned, from the Ukrainian side, and I think for the general European security, the positive side that the Europeans are in, but of course it undermines sort of the plan that Russia had in mind, because Russia wanted to basically speak to Americans and impose their thinking of peace, and they're basically not the thinking of peace, but their goals and ultimatums on Ukraine. And right now, Europeans, in their point of view, are making things more complicated, because we have seen these talks that took place in Berlin. We have seen the declaration from the leaders in Berlin, and we see that, you know, in those lines that they presented, they sort of support, you know, Ukrainian sovereignty. They talk about security guarantees. They talk about this multinational force that could be ensuring the peace from European side once the agreement is reached. They talk about strong Ukrainian army. So you know, the prospects of that, and then European future for
on the topic
Ukraine.
of prospects. Sorry to jump in there, but I mean, there are many layers to this, and I would like to go in more, but we'll have to unfortunately close it there. Look, really appreciate all your insights. I know it's a very difficult and a lot of raw issues that are coming through all the time, but thank you so much for that. Iryna Krasnoshtan, much appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more.